Okay, so welcome back to the CEO Advantage podcast. We're doing things a little bit differently in this episode. Paul, welcome back to your show.
Thank you, Millie. Awesome. Go for it.
So the reason why this one's a little bit different is because it's very special and close to my heart. We are interviewing Hugo Toovey, my beautiful brother. Welcome, Hugo.
Thank you, Millie. Thanks for having me, and thank you, Paul. It's an honour to be part of the podcast and have you, Millie, interview me.
Great to have you here.
So you've probably heard of Hugo. You've probably seen him on Sunrise and the newspapers and various podcasts and shows. So we'll talk about Hugo's story in a second, but we're going to ask you a question that we ask everyone, and that is, what was your first job? Do I actually know this?
I think you would. I'm pretty certain my first paying job was at the good old St. Peter's
Bakehouse,
which I think was a rite of passage for many of St. Peter's College boys. And then I think you also there,
all three of us.
And my twin brother. So it was, but it was always quite embarrassing to say. But I never really got promoted to serving, so I was always just like, Hugo, go clean the dishes. So I remember one day that someone walked out the back and I had to sort of fill in, and it was a big thing for me because I was serving a pie to someone. I hadn't actually been doing that. So I look back at that and go, geez, they mustn't have trusted me if I couldn't even bloody serve some food to people.
How old were you when you were a dish pig?
I think when we started, probably 14.
Yeah.
And then everyone's sort of usually there for a couple of years. Many a hangover mornings
in the back fridge with your secret stash. That's not. Hopefully, Damien's not listening.
No, if you are Damo, we love you.
We love you, Damo. So, and funny, quite ironic, because Max and I think were a bit of the front house and interacting with customers a lot. But now, out of the three of us, you're the one that is doing the public speaking and more than any of us. So,
which is interesting. It's probably a path we can take in this chat. Is that through school years, I was never a prefect. I never had leadership positions, even, joining the army. Early days, I never thought I'd get through the training, and I was never sort of what you would view as being a leader or a confident sort of person that, could be charismatic and talk to a crowd. But it's fascinating that all these years later, I'm, now being in the military for 15 years, I'm still a current serving major, and like you said, I do a lot of keynote talks and do a lot of public speaking. So it's funny how you start off in something that you never thought you would have, been in the position I am now. But there you go.
And I think, like, with your story, like, you were a little bit of how do we say it? Like, you didn't really know where you wanted to go in life in your professional career.
Yeah, for sure.
I guess like that's probably safe to say. Like, growing up, I think Max, your twin brother, wanted to, knew at the age of 3, right, what do I need to do to earn to pay for my red Ferrari when I'm older? Like, he knew, and he was just born with a briefcase. And that's very much him. But do you want to, let's start with that, shall we?
Yeah,
like, what was it?
It's a good point. And yeah, my twin brother Max was always, he was doing the Chinese in year 10 or 11 because he knew that, being semi-fluent in Chinese was a good thing to do if you want to be in the business world, for example. So he was always earlier days, was looking far forward. Whereas for me, like you said, I was very lost and had no idea what I wanted to do. I was smart enough, like I got pretty good grades and quite a high TR.
Very, very smart. So actually, out of the three of us, Hugo was actually the smartest.
which is interesting. But I think one thing's being smart enough and getting grades that allows you to choose a path, but the other's not knowing what you want to do. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself because, my mates or my twin brother knew exactly what they wanted to do. And I thought that, I had to do something because that's what you needed to do. You needed to study law, commerce, Adelaide Uni, because that's what your TR said you could do, as opposed to doing something because you really wanted to do it. And I think my dad knew that I was a bit lost in what I wanted to do post-school. And that's when he came across the Australian Defence Force Academy, which is officer training. You basically join straight from school. And I think for him, my dad, he thought that would be a great opportunity for me to kind of get thrown in the deep end, to learn something a bit different, discipline, all that sort of stuff. Not that I was completely off the rails, but, I definitely didn't make my bed every morning like I do now, or I wasn't the best buddy one at ironing, whereas now it's, ironing pillowcases, everything's crisp. But it's funny, back then, I think for me, it was just doing something different, which I really liked.
Did you go to Canberra? You went to ADFA in
so
Canberra?
I did 3 years at ADFA in Canberra. You then get a Bachelor of Business through the University of New South Wales. So I think I liked that idea as well, that you got paid to study, you did some military training, you finished the 3 years with a degree, and then you go across the hill to Duntroon. And then I did 12 months at Royal Military College Duntroon, which is pretty full on army training. And even then, I was never the fittest. I was, never had like the leadership positions there, but I was always, and I always have been in my life, as soon as I set my mind to something or I start something, I'll do whatever I can to finish that. And that's with plenty of times over the years being in the army where, I've just kept pushing through exercises and training and just pushed myself, which meant I got through it all. And then I graduated as a young lieutenant, and that was 15 years ago. And if you had asked me when I joined that I'd been 15 years later as a major in the army, there's no way I would have believed you. It wasn't like where I thought it was almost just like something I might do for a few years because it's a bit of fun and then I'll do something else. But I guess to the Army's credit, they've done something right and they have looked after me, as we'll talk about.
Interesting. How old were you then when you went to ADFA?
Straight from school, so I'd have been 18.
There you go. So similar reminds me of the Brent Riley story of sort of being young and leaving home and almost sort of entering that early adult era surrounded by lots more adults that are not your family. You had a similar sort of experience. Yeah,
for sure. It's the classic, your day one, they shave your head and you're with all these other young men and women who are in a similar situation. And you're doing things that is so foreign. You're getting up, yelled at by drill sergeants at 5 a.m. and doing morning PT and going outfield. And it's a very different life. Living in Canberra away from the comfort of the cushy life that we had in Adelaide, you're kind of thrown in a completely foreign world. But I think I probably needed that at that stage of my life. And I look back on it and I'm so glad I did it.
I think, was that the late, I'd love to, there's so much I want to unpack in this episode, but one of the things I really would love to know, and I haven't actually asked you these questions even outside of, this obviously, is the types of leaders you came across in the army. Like, it would have been pretty tough love. Like,
for sure.
And you said that you needed that discipline. But were there periods where you just like, okay, I think I've got 2 questions. Have you got some leaders in mind during that first stages in the army where you're like, wow, that is a leader I will remember for the rest of my life because of that? Or that is a leader I just want to forget?
I absolutely do. And I think from early days, being as a young 18-year-old to now, it probably hasn't changed. The leaders that I really admired early on, and the leaders that I've admired recently through my career are typically the ones that are quite calm. They don't have to be the loudest in the room. They just have a sense of presence to them. You immediately respect them for whatever reason. They don't need to yell at you or, they don't need it to prove themselves. They've just got that aura to them. And I think I picked that up from when I was 18. I remember the captain back then who was our sort of officer in command. And I just respected him so greatly. And he would just have to stand at the back during drill and you'd be like, oh God, he's looking at us. And you just, you just respected him. And then you'd get the ones that would almost be overly sort of overt in their disciplined ways of, yelling at you. And you kind of need that being like a drill sergeant. But it's funny, they don't ever stand out as being the ones that I look back at being like, wow, they were just amazing. And I would have done anything for them. If anything, they're the ones that you'd often be like, geez, old mate's a bit of a dickhead. And that's been the case throughout my career and even today and throughout all my health challenges. I've had some very senior ranking officers that, some of the more senior ranking officers in the army who I necessarily haven't really admired for whatever reason. But then I've had some who are just like, straight away through almost like a 10-minute interaction, you can tell, you're like, wow, they're amazing. And it's no secret that they're so well respected by everybody and universally loved. So they're the people that I've been attracted to.
In my 25 years as a CEO, one of the hardest things to find was a consulting and advisory firm where they'd actually been CEOs. I created CEO Advantage to be the advisory firm I was looking for. go to ceoadvantage.com.au and find out how we can help you and your team be the best in the business. Really, that in our conversation that we had with Carolyn Curtis, she talked about the importance of in leadership, that the really good leaders and really exemplary leadership has a strong sense of a connection with themselves, and that leadership and themselves is connected, and it's a bit like what you're saying, Hugo, as well, is that there's that sense of humanity and that connection with themselves and their leadership role has an enormous power that I think other people try and overcompensate for by over-promoting, being too noisy, being too mean, being too rich, all those different things. They're compensating for that lack of connection with humanity. But the ones that you remember and the ones that you admire are the ones that can combine that authority with humanity. Is that kind of the vibe?
Spot on, Paul. And I think that's something I've then tried to naturally emulate in myself. And I think for many respects, it's often something you can't force it. Just for some people, it might come naturally. And I think for me and the work I do now, and then early on when I went through my health challenges and making a conscious an effort to share what I'd gone through and be vulnerable, I've really used that to my advantage, and it's shown growth for me as a person. But I probably underestimated how much other people took out of me sharing my story or being open, honest, and vulnerable. And people actually taking so much out of that. And there are a lot of us who go through adversity or challenges that can be quite closed in sharing that, because for whatever reason we think it might change people's perception of you, it might impact your careers, and I get for certain situations that might be applicable. But for me, I never hid behind what I was going through. Maybe early days when I was a young 21-year-old, when I first went through my first bout of cancer. But as I learned, there was no shame in what I'd gone through. And then I got quite good at, if I had a new posting in the army, I'd very, in the first sort of interview I had with my supervisor, I'd be very open with him, and they'd often say, "Oh, by the way, you don't actually have to be telling me all this." I'm like, "No, I know that, but I find that for me, it's important that you know exactly what I'm going through. So if I have those days where I'm not able to be in the office, you know where I am. I'm open that I still see a psychologist, for example, every few weeks, and I think it's important to talk about that." And then talking about the best boss I've ever had in the army was one that I'd had a similar conversation. I told him what I'd gone through. He'd heard a bit of my story through a previous colleague of his, and he sat down and said he admired my courage to share that, to share it to other soldiers, to share it whilst in uniform, to share it, out in the civilian world. And then he opened up and shared something he was going through, which he said, "Look, I haven't told anyone this before." And, he was a senior colonel and I was a captain at that stage. And you've got this colonel telling a junior captain something very vulnerable that he had not shared to anyone before. And it was that real kind of, epiphany moment where it's, I think, vulnerability can be contagious. And if you do it enough, other people feel like they can then be vulnerable themselves. And before you even know it, you've got a room of people that are feeling comfortable enough to open up, and they go, "Sure, actually, I've never shared that before," but they just feel like they can. And I think that's when I had that, situation with my boss. It was a beautiful moment. And he had like sort of tears in his eyes, and I said, thanks, sir. I appreciate you sharing that. And once again, he left that room, and I had the utmost respect for him for sharing that to me. And then over the next 4 years, he's to this day the best boss I've ever had. And he was exactly like I said at the start, someone that was very calm, he very well respected, very smart man, but he cared for his people. He was empathetic, and he's a very successful, senior officer in the army at the moment. So it was a great example.
Such a powerful frame and story as well for in our conversations with CEOs and people who are at the top of whatever organisation, whether it's top of the army, top of government, top of corporate, all of these things often have and need to have this sense of control. There's so many moving parts and they have control. And But sometimes, and it's been your experience, and if you're happy to share, I'd like to understand what that is. But sometimes the world takes control away, and for some people, that's such an existential threat to their identity when control is taken from them. And I know I had a walking meeting with a very, very, very capable man who I'm watching him become unwell because he's trying to stay in control of things that he's taken on too much, and he can't keep control of it. But you can see his body breaking down. He's taking on too much. But for him to be vulnerable, to get him to sort of go, one of the things you're failing at is asking for help, and acknowledging that you need it. And it's like that control thing is ironically making you unwell. You can see it happening. But in your case, what you're talking about is embracing what's happened for you and that loss of control, and making it a touchstone for people to make it okay to process it. Are you happy to share?
Yeah, sure.
With what did happen?
Yeah, and I must also say I haven't always been like this as well. And I think it's important to say that for someone listening to this that might be going through something and they might be feeling a certain way. When I first went through this, I thought I had to be a certain way and be that super positive person all the time. And often I got very good at putting on that mask and that front, because once you do it long enough, you feel like you have to be that person all the time. And then it gets harder to then sort of take that off. I've had times where I've been in a pretty dark place over the years, and we can talk about that in a second. But I suppose for me, it started out with the first bout of cancer I had, which was testicular cancer, and I was only 21. And looking back at that now, it seems like a lifetime ago. But 21-year-olds are they're so young. They've got their whole life ahead of them. And I suppose what made it particularly unique is I was probably the fittest and healthiest I'd been at that stage of my life. I had 6 months to go before I graduated as a young lieutenant. So you're passing fitness tests, you're going outfield, you're fit, you're healthy. The finish line's in sight, 6 months to go. And then sort of to have this little lump on my right testicle, I just thought nothing of it. And I remember typing on bloody Google lump on testicle, and I'd find the least severe thing you could find, and you'd be like, oh, it's nothing. I'll brush that under the carpet, because you don't think you just think, it'll be nothing. And then it wasn't until my old man said, when I told him one day, he said, mate, have you gone to a doctor? I said, no. And I'd probably put it off for over 6 months. And what made it worse was, it's not like, I had to book into the doctor and, drive 20 minutes to see them. And, I had a doctor 20 meters from my room in the army that I could just rock up to at any morning and sit there during sick parade. And they go, next. And he has a feel of your testicles and says, we'll send you off for an ultrasound. And so I had it there on a plate, but I still didn't do it. But that's because I think maybe deep down I was a bit scared maybe. I thought it would just go away. Point is, it ended up being testicular cancer. And I think there's been quite a well-documented number of young AFL players who have had testicular cancer. It is a young man's cancer, and clearly it doesn't discriminate regardless of how fit you are, because, some super healthy athletes are getting testicular cancer. But I guess what made it hard for me is the cancer had time to spread. So what would have been a pretty routine, take the nut out, happy days, it meant that I had to have pretty grueling chemotherapies and follow-on surgeries, and I went through all of that in my early 20s. And that was probably my first big identity crisis I had, when I'd found myself, bald-headed, face a bit puffed out from steroids, and you're 22 at that stage, having treatment in Adelaide, and you'd look at yourself in the mirror and you'd think like, geez, this is not where I thought I'd be in my life. And all your mates are going out living their lives as a young 20-year-old, partying and going out to town and pubs and, living around Australia. Some of my army mates even getting posted overseas, and here I'm stuck in hospital. And that was that moment of where I really struggled with how I looked, and also who I was. And that was probably my first putting on that mask, pretending I was fine, and everyone always be like, geez, you're always so positive, mate. And I think I heard that enough and quite liked that. So then I felt like that's what I had to be all the time. And back then I didn't know what I know now, so I didn't realize that you can't be that person all the time. But I got very good at being that person. And naturally, I'm a pretty positive guy. But it got to the stage where everyone's like, geez, mate, I don't know how you do it. Bloody hell. And over the years, you know, the weight of that.
When was the first time you let the mask down?
In my own, to myself, regularly.
But in front of somebody?
Look, in front of someone, you know, not for probably years after, to be honest. You know, I never back then saw a psychologist. I never, you know, had a good cry. None of those things that I do now. It probably wasn't until over the years I went through my second diagnosis and hurdle being bowel cancer, that was really difficult because I think I was more of a responsible adult. You know, you go for the young 21-year-old Hugo who was, oh, yeah, I'll beat this thing. I'm young. You know, I'll be all right. You know, yes, it was a few years of treatment and recovery, but then to fast forward to a 26-year-old who was finally, once again, fit and healthy, promoted to a captain, posted to Brisbane, lined up for deployment overseas. You know, your life's back on track. Proud testicular cancer survivor, put that behind me. Even had my 5-year all clear scan for testicular cancer. And then about 2 or 3 months later, bowels started playing up. And I suppose that one lesson, I was very proactive with my health. And my wife would often say that I was a bit of a hypochondriac, which I think's, you know, justified given what I'd gone through. But that I believe is what saved my life in many respects, because my bowels started playing up and I thought, hang on, this isn't right. You know, I've always had a bit of an inconsistent gut, but this was worse than my normal. Everyone's got different versions of that. And I found myself colonoscopy, cancerous polyps, and there I was being told I had bowel cancer at 26 and entirely new cancer. Since had genetic testing done, I've got no mutated genes. They put it down to a bit of bad luck. And that was that, to answer your question, Paul, that moment where I kind of felt that I was, you know, the first time where I thought I might not make it. Whereas all through those early days of testicular cancer, I never really thought that. I kind of just had to just get through it. Whereas that moment I thought, hang on, this might not go too well. And that was when I really struggled. And I remember leaving that appointment, and it was the first time I had a proper cry, and I left that appointment. Amber was maybe like a metre behind me, and I just had a big cry, and I was just like, almost that weight I'd just been carrying for years. I just had enough. And it was the first time probably Amber saw me have a big cry, and got in the car, and then calling my parents was tough. And I always say calling my dad was particularly hard. I'm probably getting emotional because my sister's there. That's okay. I don't get, you know, apologise for getting emotional. I think calling my dad was tough because I think, and I often talk about this, something like cancer or health events, it impacts so many other people. And I think because it had been such a long, you know, few years, and, you know, knowing you was having a colonoscopy, and I think they're the ones that you feel for, because it's like, bugger, they're going to have to go through this with you. You know, you feel a sense of, you know, guilt that you're putting them through pain. I think that's been tough for me. It still is. It still is tough. You feel like my wife and stuff, it can be tough. And now I've got a kid, you know, it's another person in your life that you have to be there for. So it's tough. And as you can see, I still get a bit emotional about it, probably because my sister's here.
I'm just going to say, oh my God, this is the first episode where it's going to be lots of tears, but like you said that you felt guilty. Like that's, like, I feel like as a family member, like I couldn't be in your shoes. So I felt guilty that I couldn't be there with you every day. So that's just insane that I can't believe you had that guilt.
Yeah, I know. And I think because you can see that we've got a very close family, and that's something I'm very grateful for. And I feel for those people that go through significant hardship that don't have a close family, because I don't think I'd be here today if it wasn't for those people in my life, you know, my village of people who have supported me. And I think it's something that's, once again, it's been a longish answer to your question, Paul, but those were the years where I, as you can see, I still get quite emotional talking about family, and it's because I'm still going through health challenges, truth be told. So I think it's still very raw, but those were the moments where I felt, you know, I needed to start being more open, honest, and vulnerable. You know, I couldn't continually be this super positive person, because it was impossible to be that person when I was just going through some very full-on times and massive surgeries and hospital and in and out, and sometimes where it was almost touch and go, and I was in a pretty bad place with my mental health, and that's something I probably hadn't addressed all those previous years, doing everything I could for my cancer and physically, but then for my mental health, I didn't do much about it. And so that's why now I'm such a strong mental health advocate as well as a cancer advocate, because I've seen sort of both sides to it and the importance of why you got to work on that mental health side. And those times when I didn't, and when you're in that real dark place, it's a lot harder to treat those times than it is when you just notice things slipping a bit, having a bad week, having a bad month, and you can start working on that, as opposed to when you're in crisis and you're like, geez, this is tough to get out of this spot. So those are the moments, Paul, at the bowel cancer side, and more so the so what from that point of my life, and how to this day it's just impacted my life forever. My quality of life, it's changed it forever. And I think they're the hard parts of what I've gone through. And then knowing that it's now impacted my family, my loved ones, Amber, now my son. They're the things that even now I still struggle with a bit.
You remember a moment in that moment for Amber when you said it's the first time she'd seen you do that, and how that moment in time changed your relationship? Because there are lots of people where that is a sliding doors moment where it either really enhances and makes your relationship, or breaks it, depending on how the other person responds to it. And there's a massive amount of vulnerability and risk for you, whether you could hold it back or that emotion came out. But there's a whole lot of risk that happens with, what if I'm displaying all of this emotion she hasn't seen before. What if she reacts badly to it? All of those. What did that do for you?
It's a good point. I haven't probably looked at it that way before, but it's a really good point. It's, there's what we've gone through has absolutely made us so much closer and so much stronger. And I guess at that point in time of leaving that doctor's rooms and bursting into tears, I guess I didn't really think about what I was doing, right? I couldn't help it. I was just overcome with emotion. And I guess from that point on till now, and that was 2018 till now, for the last 7 years, my wife Amber's supported me every step of the way. And I think it's made us so strong. And I'm also very open to say that, of course, like any relationship, we go through our ups and downs, but in particular me and the person I've been over those years, when I've had those struggles with my mental health and the frustration of what I'm going through, and it's made me probably not the best person to be around. And when I used to be quite closed, one thing I've really worked on with my psychologist and my therapist is being more open to Amber when those situations happen. And so for now, it's, going, Amber, I'm having a real bad day. I'm in a mood. I'm frustrated. I'm over this situation. I was up at 2 a.m. Amber ran me a bloody bath with Epsom salts, and I was just over it all. But it's recognizing that now and communicating it with her. And I think this whole situation's forced me to do that. It's forced us to do that. Whereas many couples probably are never faced with those significant challenges, where they have never been in that situation where they've had significant adversity that they've had to face that, right? So they've just kind of had probably things happen here and there, but then it's not until something big happens in your life. And you're right, it can be a risk because you don't know how each other's going to respond to it. For us, it brought us closer, and, I think it's made us appreciate the little moments so much more. I often say that any given day, and today's no different, the two of you, I'm sure there's many parts of today where you've just taken things for granted, whether it's been the morning shower and the hot water, whether it's been that, that drive to work where it just got, you got all the green lights, whether, I don't know, you got a nice little text from an old friend you hadn't heard from, or it can be even something as small as that, really great coffee that Nick made me before. It can, they're the moments where I've got better now to appreciate those moments more. And it's that sense of mindfulness, which people often think it's being a yogi and sitting there bloody meditating. But mindfulness is just, being in the present. And realizing that there are little parts in your day that can, they add up. And I call them the little small wins that can eventually snowball up to quite big wins. And I learnt that when I was in hospital, and you're forced to when you're looking at all your mates on social media and they're holidaying around and living a great life, and you're stuck in bed with a bloody stoma bag and you haven't eaten for 3 weeks and you're pretty unwell. Well, clearly, my wins are going to be very different to someone else's wins living overseas in Europe, having a great old time. But it's important that you still have to find those, because if you don't, that's when you can get in a really bad way. So yeah, it's taught me a lot about myself, but also about my relationship with Amber. And I strive all the time to be not just a better person, but to be a better husband to her, because she deserves that, given everything she's gone through. And now be the best dad I can be. And it's something that I know I'll always have to work on. It's foolish to think that you're ever going to be perfect with that, but I like the fact that you identify that, and I like the fact that I'm working on it.
You also touch on something that for our kids is something that they'll have to work through. But you touched on this incredible weight of comparison, of comparing my life to other lives. And I grew up in a different era to you, where in the sense of I wasn't bombarded with social media images and all of those things of how life is in the moment for other people, whereas our kids are growing up with this relentless comparative pressure on them all the time. And you talked about what an extra level of weight, not only what you're going through and how you're feeling about yourself, but also a sense of loss of, compared to others, I'm not doing this thing. Isn't that such an insidious mental cycle that is invisible I think, in our children and in lots of people, of going, oh, relative to others, I'm not, as opposed to just in the moment, I'm glad to be here and I'm glad for conversations. But that weight of comparison that you put yourself through, did you realize you were doing that? Or is it now on reflection you can see how?
I think you're right. It's probably more upon reflection. I think at that time, I probably underestimated how damaging it can be doing that and the compare. We all do it, but in particular when you're going through a really difficult time. And I think social media there are great benefits from it, and I've seen the real positives from it. But you're right, there can be that part to it where, whether it be lying in a hospital bed and scrolling through and subconsciously through every post you see or every story you see, you're comparing yourself to that person and what they're doing in their life to yourself. And I think we all do it to some degree, and it's probably just has more weight when you're going through
the social media companies cash in on that.
Yeah.
That's how they get used to scroll, is by cashing in on that psychology of comparison.
Yeah, for sure. And that's it's interesting. It's when I first got Instagram, it was absolutely the, going out and holidaying in the nice restaurants and the everything's perfect life, which some people still do that. And I think most of us know now that, the influencers or whatever you follow, most of us know that that's not a realistic life, but we still follow them and we still see it daily. But for now, it's, whether I put stories up or post up that are at my absolutely most vulnerable, I think that's something that has changed for me over the years. And I've actually really embraced that part to it, where it's like, actually, you know what, I can use this for good. Rather than just sharing my holidays and highlight reels, I can actually share my day-to-day behind the scenes for people who are also going through a really difficult time, like I was when I was back in hospital through all those years, and actually see someone like myself and go, oh shit, Hugo's going through that, or what he just said, then I can really relate to, and they might, send me a message, and I can then check in on them, and you're creating this special bond. And I said to someone actually yesterday, I was in Melbourne for a presentation. I was speaking to someone afterwards, and her husband's going through a bit of a difficult time with a cancer diagnosis, and he doesn't really have anyone to talk to, or his mates can't really relate to what he's going through. And I told her to get him to reach out to me. Because I said to her, I've got so many online friends, which sounds funny when you say online friends. It sort of sounds like when you're at school and you don't have any real friends, but some of my online friends are probably my most special friends that I've never met in person, because we continually check in on each other. You know, I probably speak to them more than I would to some of my closest mates. You know, they might be going through a really difficult time and I comment on their story, say, geez, how you going, mate? How's that round of treatment going? Or vice versa. And you've got that little bloody accountability buddy that can just, you know, make sure that you're doing okay. And it's something that I think in society, our closest people, we don't do that enough with. You know, the friendships we take for granted, you know, the family members that we don't speak to like enough, as much as we should. So often for me, it's those online friends and the relationships I've built who I've never met in the real world that I'm actually really close with, because you can be your true self. You can feel like you can be vulnerable. You've got someone always checking in on you. And I thought about that yesterday when I was talking to this lady, and I thought, it's an interesting thing that, you know, I can do that with them, which is great to have, but not to as much with my mates or friends I've known for many years.
I think, yeah, that's very true. But I wanted to, I keep writing down little notes. Oh, I just want to go back to that. But what you were just talking about then, I think just sums you up so beautifully as a natural leader. And that is that checking in. Like you're talking about and asking questions, like checking, going back to the conversations that you have with Amber. You know, you open book, checking in. How are you? You have this open door where you become, like, anyone who's going through something can reach out to you and just say, look, this is how I'm feeling. And I think that's something that probably any leader, especially like a CEO, needs to probably embrace. What do you think, Paul? Like that Absolutely. Open door.
If you don't, there's two things that you touched on then. One is the open door, but I just want to touch on the delusion of the open door. There's lots of leaders who say to people, my door is always open, come on in and tell me. And they say that, usually they mean it. But there's a part where they're saying that and the person they're saying it to will never walk through that door. It's actually the leader's job to get out of your chair, go through the same door that you said is always open, and go and sit with them and say, no, really, how are things going for you? So I think there's this delusion of open door where people say, oh, you can always come and approach me and whatever. But actually there's a lot, and men in particular are not going to walk through that door, even though you invited them, because they don't know how to walk through the door. They don't know how to manage whether it's the pride or the conversation or how to start it or whatever. So it's a delusion of open door sometimes that leaders have. And I think Hugo's talking about more than an open door. It's an open door that you both walk through. He's walking out of to get people, and people can walk in. So I just wanted to touch on what open door means. And I also think the idea of leaders and leadership showing vulnerability. I can remember a meeting that I was at pains over because I had really had a bad week the week before, and I was coming into an exec meeting going, can a CEO admit that I had a bad week last week and I underperformed last week? Because you're supposed to not underperform. You're supposed to be on it all the time. And so I can remember going, oh my God, do they even know? I mean, surely they know I had a bad week. Surely they're talking about it. I know I've had a bad week. And I really had this ridiculous conversation with myself about whether or not I would say to them, I'm sorry I underperformed last week. This is how I'm going to be better. And did it. I was like, CEOs don't talk. But I did it. And they were like, it was so interesting. They just went, oh my God, thank goodness you did that. We were all talking about it as if, imagine if he doesn't know that he was a bit shit last week, and we were all worried about the whole organisation and our jobs because he was a bit shit. So thank goodness you said that. And so the vulnerability as power was the first time I ever saw it. It was like, if I hadn't admitted that I'd had a bad week, they would have thought I was nuts, that I was the only person in the room who didn't see that I was underperforming. So
it goes back to the conversation that you had with your favourite senior leader. When he opened up as a leader, you all of a sudden gained so much more respect for him, like that.
Yeah, and for sure, I think exactly what you're saying is the fact that you can now look at him, you can now look at Paul as being, okay, they're human, you know, they don't have all the answers. So then if you're in that position of thinking that, you know, you're that imposter syndrome of thinking that, you know, I shouldn't be in this senior position because I'm not good enough or I don't know the answer to this, then you see someone even more senior to you, like the CEO, go, actually, you know what? I don't know what's going on. So I have had a bad week. I haven't performed as well this week. I feel like it makes other people feel a bit more comfortable and go, okay, I don't have to beat myself up as much. And I've experienced that a bit over the years, and I think it's important. It's like the old school with when you're in, you know, a classroom and putting your hand up, you know, and often there's a few people thinking the same question, but they're sitting there and they don't want to ask that question because they think, well, no one else is thinking the question and I'm going to be an idiot for not knowing this answer. So no one answered the question. But if old mate asked the question, often there's a few people that are like, oh, I want to know that too. And they're sitting there going, I'm glad he asked that. And then all of a sudden, if there was the most senior person in the room sitting at the back and goes, this is probably a bit silly, I probably should know this, but can you just explain what you mean by that? All these people are like, oh, okay. So it's okay that you can ask questions. And I think we're taught that from school days, really. And we're kind of go through that throughout most of our life, professional life, social life. Often the people that we admire most, you know, I'm sure they've had times where they don't know what's going on. They just kind of bullshit their way through it. And that's fine too.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful permissions I got, and I heard from somebody in a leadership position, and I just shamelessly pinched it because I just thought it was so good, was I was in a meeting with a senior person and they said, I don't know what all the answers are, but I'm pretty smart, so I'm going to find them along the way. And so if we work together, I'm sure you might find them faster than me. That is so good. So you're going to start, you don't know all the answers, but now you're going to get me to scout for them with you. It was just so powerful to not to say I don't have them, but I'm pretty smart and I'll find them. Do you want to join me? It's like, yeah, I do.
Yeah, let's figure it out together.
Yeah, and the other thing that I watch them powerful leaders do that I again shamelessly pinched was to go, Hugo, you said some things. I don't know about anybody else here, but I didn't understand it. Can you say it again in a new way, so I can maybe connect with it? And it just became this most powerful thing that I could do was if I didn't understand it, then to be the one to say, I didn't. Often the person that said it didn't understand it either, but because they were in a conversation, they talked their way through it, and they were hoping sometimes that they're like, oh, I hope this conversation's over, we can move on, because I didn't quite know, I was bullshitting a bit. But to make it safe, to sort of go, I didn't kind of get that. Can you say that again in a way that I can understand? It's me. But actually it helps the person go, let's process it together differently and explore it. It doesn't mean, so you're not calling out bullshit, because that's terrible, but also it gives other people permission to go, I didn't understand that either. Let's do it again. So what you're talking about there is this idea of being open-minded and being curious, but curiosity as a leadership power and as a leadership skill, rather than, and I think people lean for certainty, and you're talking about that mask of, I've got to put on this mask of certainty, but actually that mask of certainty is what keeps you fragile and keeps your leadership fragile. But what Hugo sort of said is like putting the mask down and embracing curiosity is actually more powerful and it's more human, but it's actually this pathway to learning that you're obviously still on and doing.
Speaking of so pathway, like let's get into your professional career and pathway and how that's looking like now. And in particular, like let's share with our listeners about where, like, okay, starting 25 Stay Alive, which is your now, congratulations, official charity. But it started, when did it start? Why did it start? What's your mission? What's your vision? Just tell us all, how do you start a movement?
Yeah. No, it's something that I was saying offline. I've worked in the charity space for a number of years, and it's been very fulfilling. Outside of my army job, I've worked for amazing organisations like Movember and Gotcha for Life, and locally the Jodie Lee Foundation, and I still do bits and pieces with them. But I suppose when I was going in the midst of some of those moments I was talking about before, I'm in my mid-20s. I'm going through these significant challenges. I'm not sure what the next 5-10 years is like. And as soon as I started connecting with some people, I was just talking about those online relationships that I've really had over the years. I found out, or I realized that I wasn't alone in this, and I was surprised by that, because I think often when you go through these significant challenges, like a cancer diagnosis in your 20s, for example, you often feel very isolated. You feel like you're going through it by yourself, and you probably don't realize that there are other people out there probably experiencing similar things that can actually relate a bit to you. And the more I started sharing my story, the more that I went on podcasts, or the more, went on, did some talks, and every single time I'd connect with more people who are going through a similar thing, or my brother's going through this, or my sister's going through that. And then tragically, I also saw the other end of it, where you saw the people who weren't as lucky as I am, where I'm still here and able to tell my story, who got sort of late stage diagnosis of, something like cancer. And, I've been to several funerals now of people in their 20s, late 20s, who have died of things like melanoma, bowel cancer, and you're sitting there, and, they unfortunately detected it too late, essentially. And it really drove me to sort of ask that question, why? I feel like there's so much out there as far as awareness for the older demographic. When you turn 50, you get the screening kit in the mail. It's just been lowered now to 45, which is great. So you're 45 now, you get your screening kit, which is great. You test it with your bloody poo, and you brush it away, send it off, and it might say, yep, there was microscopic blood, we'll do a colonoscopy. Or women, when they're 50, they get their mammogram test. And it's almost like, for the perception of a lot of Australians, it's almost like when you turn 50, a lot of those sort of significant health challenges in life, that's when it starts. But up until then, you're kind of young, and you hear it all the time, oh, you're young, you're fine. When, I don't know if your dad or someone in their 50s and 60s says that to you, like, oh, you're young, you'll be right. You got your whole life and you're healthy, and it's how we're accustomed to believe how our health is. So naturally, when you're in your 20s, going to the doctor, having annual checkups, being proactive with your health isn't really on your radar. It's not a priority. And I started experiencing this in different parts of people I was speaking to in different parts of my life. And that's when I created this sort of, initially it was a bit of a group, 25 Stay Alive, and it symbolized that the age 25, it symbolized that young adult who was going through some health challenges. It was almost like a community where they could start sort of, connecting with others who were going through it. It started off by doing a podcast and getting these amazing guests on who were going through their own significant health challenges. And then it kind of grew bigger than that. I realized that, this concept of 25 Stay Alive could actually be something that could save lives. And I then started having initial chats with government, and I had this vision, which I still do. It's, for when you turn 25, no different to when you turn 50, like I was just talking about. When you turn 25, you're sent through your MyGov account, like you are with your bloody ATO, your tax returns due. Happy birthday, Millie. Did you know? And there's a bit of a fact sheet of, bowel cancer is now the biggest cancer killer for those aged 25 to 44. Suicide's now the biggest killer for men in Australia, period. Things that you probably weren't thinking about, but more importantly, based off your registered postcode, you're partnered with a local GP. So, you're seeing local GP in, say, Brighton, for example, and you go see the GP, and then we've developed this 5-point checklist, and Millie, who's just turned 25, books in. It's a complimentary 30-minute consultation. They've got this checklist, and it's not foreign. The GP knows what's going on. They go through it, family history. They do a few checks. They might say, Millie, you actually do have a clean bill of health, all looks pretty good. We'll see you in 12 months. And then 12 months comes around, like when your car's due for the annual service and the ding, you're 4 days overdue for a service. Every time you get in the car, it reminds you. You sent reminders, and then Millie then goes, geez, I'm 2 months overdue for my annual checkup. She goes in to see her GP. Good to see you again, Millie. Have an annual checkup. Yeah, well, actually, there's a few things going on. Then I might just refer you to that specialist. And you're that whole concept you're doing from 25 for the rest of your life. And now I know straight away there are limitations with this, the access to GPs, there's going to be hurdles, but most importantly, the government loves the idea initially. We just got to work towards that. And that's my kind of long-term goal, where I see 25 Stay Alive as the future of Australian healthcare, is that every single 25-year-old for the rest of their life has a relationship with a GP. They have annual checkups. They know it's important to be proactive with your health. It's not foreign. And that's just the new normal. So you're not getting these cases of a 29-year-old who's got blood in their poo and they haven't gone off to their doctor. People are going to be very in tune with their bodies. So that's kind of the vision I had. And to get there, I really just want to make it an education piece for young people. And that's why I partner with, local sporting clubs or universities or workplaces. Paul, you were saying your son heard one of my workshops at Pembroke Kings in Adelaide. And it's partnering with like-minded younger GPs. And we go and we did some skin checks at Pembroke, for example. And a young lad, Harry, had melanoma, mid-20s. And so we decided to do a melanoma-themed round because that was close to their heart. And I think we got through about 50 young men and women had skin checks through a couple training sessions and the game. And from which there are a few that had some suspect moles or whatever. And then there was one that actually had a pre-cancerous mole removed.
Wow.
So that was the CEO of Pembroke Kings, Kathy. I remember she messaged me a month or so later and she sent this most powerful message saying, just want to let you know that workshop you did with Pembroke, you and Lane, who's the 25 Stay Alive doctor, one of the guys, the mum just messaged me, they've just had a precancerous mole removed from that skin check you did back then. And that's when it's that, geez, like, this exists, and I was never wanting to get into the charity space with something that already existed by flooding the mental health charity space, or, I've always wanted to collaborate with other charities that do it really well, but I wanted to do something specifically to do with GPs, health checks, educating young Australians to know that it's important to do testicular cancer self-exams. How do they look? It's important to see your GP. It's important to talk about this stuff, checking on your mates. And so that's kind of how I started it. And it's just kind of grown over the years. It's now a fully registered charity, which is amazing because it means that the funding that we get, we can actually partner with more GPs. There can be more of me. So it's, unfortunately, given my health, I can't often travel all the time, and we're going to Kingston with my wife in a few weeks, and we're bringing Lane along, and we're doing some health checks. We want to purchase little mini SISU health machines, and we want to get multiple doctors and go all around Australia to as many footy clubs and young communities as we can to just spread these important messages. And you got to start somewhere, and for me, it's given me the ultimate purpose and passion that I can actually go, you know what, if it wasn't for what I'd gone through, all those terrible things that have happened in my life and continue to go through it, I wouldn't be in a position where you can save lives. And, we often talk about, what's the most important things in life. Well, I can tell you right now, when you get those sort of messages, or I've had multiple over the years of people reach out on Instagram, say, by the way, I heard your story, I've got diagnosed with bowel cancer, but I just want to let you know I'm now cancer free. Or someone reaching out saying I was suicidal and I heard what you were talking about and it made me seek help and I'm now getting the support. I'm doing a lot better. So thanks, mate. And you start getting these messages and it's like, it's pretty powerful to get those, realizing that you've actually saved these people's lives. Imagine if I could do that, not just for me, but scale it and have that multiple effect to thousands of people. It'd be a pretty amazing thing. So that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Thousands, millions, around the world, having conversations about, how to measure that impact, especially.
For sure. And I think it's just for young people, when I say young people, the young adults of the world, it's a very vulnerable age. For the most part, you've kind of moved out of home. You don't have the support from mum and dad anymore, and you're paying rent for the first time, or it's, your first post-uni job, and, actually being a responsible adult, what that looks like. And it can be pretty difficult. The cost of living, which, we all hear about, and for people living in Sydney, and going out and spending bloody $20 for a bloody pint of beer, and it's just not affordable or sustainable. So then naturally you've got so many things going in your life, often your health, and seeing a doctor or booking in for a checkup just isn't a priority. So it's just changing that landscape of, well, hey, your health's still important through these years too. And how that can look is, well, we can get out there and try and teach and educate and inspire as many young people as we can. So that's my vision, and hopefully we can get there.
Interesting is that we talked about on the CEO Advantage podcast before about these 4 kinds of CEOs, where we've talked about the professional CEO, the intergenerational CEO, where they've inherited a business. We've talked about public sector CEOs who have the title and then they run important departments and doing all that sort of stuff. And then we've talked about the founder CEO. And I think when people first hear that, they think founder CEO and they think of Silicon Valley and think of building a business and being the founder of a successful business and all of those different things. But what Hugo's just shone a light on, which is just really powerful perspective on being a founder CEO, is Hugo's the founder of a movement. He's the founder of a purpose, and now he's brought that into an entity, and may or may not, it seems to have chosen you, and you've become a not-for-profit founder and a not-for-profit leader. And it's chosen you. And we've touched on this a couple of times before, of almost the reluctant, we talked about with Craig, running an Indigenous organisation and saying, well, I did it because I cared about it. And now it's become this big thing that I didn't intend to run. You're just sort of starting this journey. Do you see yourself as a founder and as somebody who's created this entity, and do you have a vision for the entity itself?
It's an interesting point, and I think it's, for a while, and I know you've probably spoken about it before on the podcast, that imposter syndrome. I still get that, and I still feel like, why does someone want to hear me? Why does someone want to pay me to go and speak to their group of employees and be a keynote speaker? And like early days, I really struggled with that concept. Like, I'm just this normal guy that's in the army that's gone through some health challenges that just decided to share my story. And I really struggled with that because it's harder to see. I didn't feel initially anyway that I was offering something to them. And it's, through certain people I'd spoken to and mentors that have tried to tell me that, you absolutely are valid and you shouldn't be thinking that way. But I still every now and then get that. And to answer your question, I think even now I'm just starting to get my head around the fact that there does have a level of pressure now. And, going from doing what I'm doing as just me, sharing my story, being a keynote speaker, working for a charity, as opposed to then having your own charity now and your more responsibility with that. And I'm now starting to embrace that though. And I'm really enjoying it in the fact that I feel like now I've got even more drive and wanting to do more and grow the team. And at the moment, when I say the team, it's literally just me, my wife, and Dr. Lane, who's our GP. And I want to grow that team, but I think it gives me a lot of motivation to do so, because like I just spoke about that story, then I want to hear more of that and do more of that. But then the side of still being in the army is a difficult one too, because I've always been very grateful for what the army's provided me and what they've given me, but I'm now at that stage in my health, my career, my professional life where I clearly have to make a choice. But I'm also mindful that when I've still got these significant health challenges, having that level of security is extremely important. And, going on your own, throwing yourself headfirst into being a founder and CEO of a startup charity, you lose a lot of that security for someone who's got significant health challenges and medical expenses and all these sort of things. So it's a lot to grasp and a lot to was speaking to someone the other day and they're like, geez, you've got a lot going on. Like most people, when I'm still on treatment, I've got this major surgery coming up in September. A lot of people, when they're just going through health stuff, that's kind of all they're focusing on. But for me, it's like I'm wearing different hats and I've now got my own charity and I'm traveling all the time and I'm trying to then do my job in the army, and it can be difficult to navigate all that. But I guess I like being busy in a way. It's probably a distraction for me, that if I'm not busy, or if, I don't have these things that I'm doing, I then start thinking more about my reality of what I'm going through and the fact that I'm still going through challenges. And that's when I start to get in that vicious cycle and that headspace, which I don't like. So yeah, to answer your question, I still battle with the concept that I'm a founder CEO, because I still feel sometimes that I'm just me. I'm just this normal guy that's just your everyday Aussie bloke that just shares his story and has a small little platform of people that for some reason bloody connect with me and like what I talk about. And that's sometimes how I view it, to be honest. And that's, I guess, probably what's relatable to people, is because that's exactly how I do my keynotes and exactly how I do my presentations. And that's probably what gets the blokes at a construction site that's heard many a polished keynotes and people come in there and talk to them about mental health. And I come in there and afterwards you've got these blokes coming up to me and giving me a hug and having tears in their eyes, and scary looking tradies who at the start of the presentation arm crossed thinking, here's this another young guy coming in that's giving a mental health talk, to at the end they're giving me a hug and they're opening up, and we just spoke about sharing something they're going through. And I've had it multiple, pretty much after every presentation, I'll have someone in those construction worlds, I've never shared this before, or I've never said this to someone before, because they now have that safe space where they can feel like they can share that to me, because I've just stood there for the last hour sharing everything I'd gone through, getting emotional like I just did earlier on. So then they're like, hang on, I feel like I can let this guy know what I'm going through. And they're just not in a position yet where they want to see a psychologist or a therapist. It's just not where they're at. But for them to even, to give me the opportunity to share that, I think it's a very special thing and something I don't take lightly. And so I'm not a clinician, and I'll always say that, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a doctor, but you just sharing that to me then is the first most powerful step you can take. And thank you for sharing that. And let's just go sit over there and have a coffee and have a chat about it. And then it's an awesome thing, because for them, they've just got that foot in the door, and then hopefully from them they can get the help they need. So yeah, that was a long-winded answer, but I think I'm still learning. I'm still on the journey myself, but I don't shy away from that. I don't try and pretend I'm someone I'm not. And I think that's what probably is what people can really relate to.
It's a really powerful story that you're telling, not just the story that you're sharing and the energy you're giving other people, but the story you just told of the level of risk you're still willing to take for yourself. And I guess the level of risk you're still willing to take for Amber and for your family, your young family, in that lots of founders go through with fewer challenges that you have, of the I have a safe job and profession that I can stay in, and I have a vision for doing something else. Letting this go to do that requires a leap of faith in lots of areas, leap into the unknown. I don't know what all the answers are, but I'm sure I'm going to find them along the way, is a bit like jumping out of a plane and saying, gee, I hope my parachute's packed properly. I guess we'll find out. Most people won't even get on the plane, let alone take off, let alone look out the window, let alone jump, and then without knowing, is my parachute going to open? But that's a path that you're choosing, as you say, where lots of people would go into themselves and feel sorry for themselves or whatever that is for themselves and their health. You're taking on even more challenges and pushing yourself. Is that a particularly Hugo way of doing things, or is that a particular way you've seen other leaders behave?
I think it was just something through what I experienced in a very small sample size, and realizing that it can help me. And I often say, for selfish reasons, I share my story and do my presentations and do my talks because it actually helps me.
Yeah.
It's almost a form of therapy. So every time I stand up there, and people often say, oh, every time you relive moments and you get emotional, or is it quite, traumatic? I say, well, it's therapeutic for me, because I can actually talk about these things. And when I kind of, like, sometimes I talk about something and go, actually, I'm not doing that at the moment. After this podcast, after a talk, I'll go home and do something for me and practice that self-care, because I realize I've just been talking about that in front of 1,000 people.
Because when you go that high, on the other end of it,
yes,
you drop off.
You do.
Very quickly.
You do. So it's important for me to practice what you preach. But I think ultimately the whole, why me, life sucks, play the victim card, which I've experienced moments of that through my last 10, 12 years of going through this. I've experienced the positive parts of doing what I do. And to me, for someone going through a difficult time in their life, I always encourage them to just share that, whatever they're going through, with someone. Start small, share it with one person, share it with two people, share it with a group of people, because you never know how your story is going to help someone else. And I always have that. Every new person I meet, I have that mindset, and I always try and turn that on. I never know what Paul's going through. I never know what Millie's going through. I never know what Nick's going through, Sinatra, all that sort of concept. I never know what people are going through, because everyone's got their own challenge, and their challenge is unique to them. And it's not to go, oh, but you're going through something so much worse. You don't want to hear this. It's like, well, no, what you're going through is very challenging for you. It's significant to you. Like, it's your challenge. It's your life. It's not mine. Like, I want to hear this. Like, I want to validate what you're going through. Don't just dismiss that, because I think often perspective's important. But if we constantly just said, oh, we're so fortunate living where we are, and there are wars going on overseas at the moment, and I shouldn't be feeling like this. Come on, snap out of it. I'm so grateful to be where I am, and be able to eat a nice hot meal every night. I get perspective, and that has helped me to certain degrees. But if you constantly have that, all you're doing is dismissing what you're going through, and you're not addressing or validating that what you're going through is a very real issue for you. And that's what I always try and tell people, that when they try and downplay that, is to address why they're feeling like that, to validate what they're going through, and to realize that actually it can get better as well, it was a pretty important thing. So I think for me, to realize that what I'm going through and I'm still living it is a key part. It's not like I went through this 10 years ago and now I'm just the healthiest I've ever been. I'm still having days where I'm in constant pain. I'm still on medications. I've still got a major surgery come up in September where I'm getting a permanent bag again, and how that's going to look. And the surgeons are worried because, blah, blah, blah. And grappling with that can be difficult. But then I'm in a position now where I wouldn't take back anything I've gone through. And people often say that flippantly, but I honestly wouldn't. And that could start from the moments of my early cancer diagnosis that led me meeting my now wife, which then led me to having the most amazing son, the whole that, it was meant to be. But I don't necessarily think that everything happens for a reason. But what I do think is that through what I've gone through has led me to here today. And it's led me to be in a position where I can openly share my story, and I'm in a position where I can help other people. And by helping other people, it actually helps you. It's like the Frank Reisman theory of the helper theory. When you help someone else, you feel better yourself. It's why people volunteer at the local shelter. It's why people volunteer for charities, because when you do something good for somebody else, it makes you feel good too. So then why wouldn't you do that? So for me, it's by doing good for what I've gone through, by helping others, it helps me. So it's a win-win. And the more you do it, the better you feel. And so that's ultimately why I started out doing it. And when you start to get a taste of that, you want to do more of it naturally.
What's really powerful about the way Hugo just told that story as well is that to remain connected with your illness, but also how you're allowed to feel about that, as opposed to being relentlessly positive, falsely positive about it all the time. And I think people do sometimes get confused with your drive and energy and positivity, but you tinged it with but I've still got some challenges coming up. You tinged it with this connection with reality. And I can remember, if you indulge me for a second, but the creation of CEO Advantage itself was a moment in time where you originally were working on my brand Structured Innovation, which was a company that I started 20 years ago and was really pushing. And I was in the throes of recovering from a motor vehicle accident where I got fairly injured. And a friend of mine who happened to be a doctor in the US, I was giving this high energy sort of, I'm doing this work and I'm doing it with Millie and we're doing this Structured Innovation website and all of these different things. And he said, man, you're having a psychological break. And I said, I beg your pardon? No, I'm not. And he said, yeah, if I was your doctor, I would put you in a body cast and so you couldn't move around. He said, you're having a psychological break from your injury. He said, you are being relentlessly positive. You have been hurt and your body is not going to keep up with, so you can't talk your way out of what's happening to you. And it was just a like, oh, wow. I think people get this picture that depression is a dark place where you sit and you don't want to talk to other people. Another version of it is where you're hyper positive and you're delusional, that you are just convincing everybody, including yourself, that everything is fine when it's not. And I think it's worth noting that, like when Hugo was telling his story, which is really powerful, is like, yes, look at this great stuff I'm doing and look how much I'm getting from doing it. But I'm still connected with the reality that sometimes I might not feel good. And that balance is really powerful. That's a level of awareness and skill and openness that you've developed that it must be part of what you're trying to share with the world as well, right?
It is, Paul, and thank you for sharing that story, because it's exactly that. And I think for other people to hopefully realize that if you're going through a particular stage in your life, that it can lead to some positive, or it can get better, but that's not going to change the fact that you're going to have times during that where you're going to have ups and downs, and to be realistic with that. And I've actually got a photo I reflect on, and it's when I was just talking about when I was often at my lowest of lows. And I reflect on a particular photo, not every day, not even every week, but when I'm going through a pretty difficult time, and I'm, like I said, I'm still going through those, I reflect on this photo, and it's a selfie of mine that I do in the mirror, where I've got my bag. I lost about 22 kilos after this major surgery, and I've got the scars, and I look very unwell, but my face, I was just so unhappy. And it was this selfie I had in the hospital mirror, and that was how I was 95% of the time. But when every time someone saw me in hospital, I had this smile, and that smiling depression concept of thinking that I was fine, but I really wasn't. And the point and why I reflect on that photo is I got through that particular time of my life, but whilst I was in the midst of it, there was no way I thought I was going to get through it. I thought, I couldn't even see that to the end of the week. I was in such a bad way that I just didn't even want to almost be there anymore, because I was just over it. I was in too much emotional and physical pain. But I got through it, even though often when people go through things, they just don't think they're going to get through it. But rather than we spoke about comparison, rather than comparing myself to someone else, I compare myself to another version of myself, and I went through that. And you're allowed to be proud of yourself. And I can look back at that and go, actually, I'm proud of myself. And that person to me would also be proud of me, going like, gee, look how far he's come. When I was back in that hospital bed, there's no way in my wildest dreams I thought I'd be in a position where I am now. So it's a thing that I do, and I encourage other people to do that when they're going through a particular challenge. If someone's listening to this now and they're going through a challenging part of their life, it's just to reflect on another stage in their life where they got through something, through a challenge. And it just gives them a little bit of hope that they're going to get through it. And that's what I always say is, as long as we just have a little bit of hope, even a glimmer of hope, and we can hold on to that, it gives you enough motivation to keep going. And I've had to really lean on that over the years, and lean on that particular moment. And I probably will continue to do so for my next big stint in September I'm about to go through it all again. I'm going to be in hospital for a month, significant recovery. let's go back to this time. I got through it. Here we go again. And it just gives me that motivation I need. So it's something that I do lean on all the time.
And your vision for 25 Stay Alive.
Absolutely.
Next that September, you'll be spending a month in hospital, going through it all again. The pain, I can't even imagine what you go through, but you'll be holding so much onto 25 Stay Alive, and that will give you energy. Like, wow, this is just another part of your story that is going.
For sure. Yeah.
25 Stay Alive is just going to
exactly. You just give me that. This is just that next stage. I just need to get through.
Yeah.
And I know I've got so many other parts of my life to look forward to. And I was chatting to Nick outside before this, having a coffee, and I was saying, speaking of 25 Stay Alive, absolutely, but then also Teddy, my son, and how much he's done as a 12-month-old baby, how much he's done to my mental health, and he doesn't even know that he's doing it. And I think children can have that impact on you. They're these little tiny people that he's just learning how to walk. Yet if I'm having a really bad day, or early this year when he visited me in hospital, it's almost like he doesn't know I'm unwell. So, I was saying to Nick, he gives me my book and he wants Dad to read his book, and he jumps on me and watches Dad's bloody scars and don't jump on his tummy. But he's just got this little smile and he wants Dad to be Dad. And I think that's sometimes what you need, and that's what I need. And it's given me the ultimate motivation. Yes, 25 Stay Alive, but now I've got 25 Stay Alive, and I've got now this beautiful son that the two of them, come September, I know that that's the motivation. That's all I'll need to get through that next challenge that I'll go through.
It's been amazing speaking with you, Hugo. Thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing your story. I think for people who are thinking about being a founder and being a CEO, you've given a whole new perspective on what pathway leads to that, and what you can build and look forward to and doing that. It's just really amazing and powerful story. And for anyone thinking about what charity they should be supporting in 2025 and 2026, I think give Hugo and 25 Stay Alive your support in so many ways. With the prospect of going through a hard time ahead of you still, the last question I ask everybody on our podcast is on those days where it's just, sometimes you get in a funk or a bad mood and you actually want to just stay in it and soak in it a little bit. But then a song comes on the radio and even if you want to stay in a funk, you can't stay in it, and it makes you smile. Have you got one that just, it'll snap you out of into a smile, even if only for a minute?
I do.
What is it?
And you'll laugh, but that's okay. It's Chappelle Roan Pink Pony Club. Pony Club.
That's my wife's favourite song.
George's favourite song.
So that's how it stands when this song came out. And Teddy loves it now, and he does the whole bopping and the Pink Pony Club, and then Amber now loves it. And then so it's one of those songs every time it plays on the radio, on the car, whatever, you crank it up, and then, Teddy's, dancing along to it. Amber and I are dancing along to it. And I think it's one of those songs that, like, it makes you feel good. I think it makes you just want to have a dance. And I don't know if Nick's musical background will appreciate that song, but it's a great one. So I love how you asked that question at the end, because it truly does. It puts us at the moment, the three of us, it puts us in such a good mood. So no, we love it.
Great.
Good.
What a great way to finish. Hugo, thank you so much. Millie, thank you so much for.
You're just beyond words, just so special. And thank you, Hugo, for, finding time for this and sharing everything like this. There's just so much more I feel like we want to touch on.
No, I I loved being here.
That out of it. So thank you, Hugo. Love you.
Thanks for having me. I loved being here. Really appreciate you having me on. So and it's very special having you there too, Millie. So thanks very much.
Well done. Brilliant.